Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. These days, social media is flooded with people trying to give you financial advice. Finfluencers telling you whether or not you should consider buying a house.
ये बाय वर्सेस रेंट अ हाउस का ना प्रॉब्लम मैं आज परमानेंटली निपटा देता हूं. हर चीज को ना एक्सेल से या फाइनेंशियल कैलकुलेटर से तोला नहीं जाता. जो किराए में
Thousands and thousands of videos trying to tell you which mutual funds you should be investing in.
There are more than 4,000 plus mutual funds in India today, but you only need 4 or 5 funds to get you the most optimal returns. Come, join my 2-hour masterclass. Attended by more
And of
than
course,
2 lakh
advice on how your money should be beating inflation.
इन्फ्लेशन आपके पैसे को कोरोड करता है. तो जहां भी आप पैसा डालेंगे, आपको इस इन्फ्लेशन से ऊपर एक रेट ऑफ रिटर्न कमाना है. 5 ऐसे तरीके जो
But in all this noise, one thing that often gets ignored is what many consider the most necessary and sound financial advice. This is the decision to get yourself health insurance. Because considering how expensive private healthcare is in the country, getting a good health insurance can end up saving you lakhs and lakhs of rupees. So today, we are taking a break from our usual programming to tell you everything you need to know about getting yourself good health insurance. We are breaking down jargon, considering all the important factors, and busting myths to help you make an informed decision. And for this, joining us is Indian Express's health reporter Anonna Dutt, who has spoken to numerous experts and has now analyzed multiple insurance policies for us. Anonna, can you begin by telling us why it is important for someone in India to get health insurance? Because this is something that a lot of young people don't end up thinking about.
So it is actually very important for something we call the missing middle, because there are several government schemes that would provide healthcare to the poor. I mean, of course, even the middle class people can go to government health sector, but that's not something we usually see. Other than that, there are also government schemes like Ayushman Bharat, which cover the poorest 40% people in this country. And of course, the rich can afford to pay out of pocket. It is the middle class people working in service sector, working jobs who need health insurance. Some do get it from their employers, but it's always a good idea to have your own health insurance as well.
Right, and this is something that we don't want to think about, but the kind of expenditure one can incur when a tragedy occurs can be enormous. So can you talk a bit about that, about the kind of problems that people can get into when they visit a private hospital but they don't have a health insurance?
So the most important thing is that about 70 to 80% of our healthcare is provided by the private sector. So there is no way of escaping them. You have to go to a private sector hospital, clinic, whatever, at some point in the life. The thing with that is the costs of healthcare is pretty high. For example, if you get into a road traffic accident, the cost could be from say 60,000-70,000 to even 5 lakhs if it's a severe injury. So that amount of money is not something that people can just shell out. And that's why we need health insurance to cover those costs at a time when you cannot pay.
Yeah, and one of the things that happens is that often when people don't have health insurance, or when your health insurance has certain exclusions, your savings really take a hit. And you often end up borrowing money from people around you, and then you're just burdened with a lot of debt.
So medical debt is a known phenomenon. Yes, people do get into trouble when, say, the insurance doesn't cover a certain thing, or you don't have an insurance and you get into a health emergency where you need surgeries and high-cost procedures. Or you have some chronic condition like chronic kidney disease or cancers where you require high-cost treatment for a long duration of time and you exhaust your insurance cover. All of these situations lead to people getting into poverty, and that is something we know. India has a very high out-of-pocket expenditure when it comes to health. That's something we know, and that is why people need insurance to sort of absorb that shock, even if it's just a 5 lakh or 10 lakh cover. But yes, that helps.
Okay, so before we finally dive into this, let me ask you something basic. Can you explain how health insurance works?
So health insurance essentially works by ensuring as many healthy people as possible and using their premiums to pay for any illness or surgeries that other people undergo. So it's a cross-subsidy kind of model where your premium till the time you are healthy pays for the sick people. And then when you are sick, other people's premium pays for your treatment.
Okay, so now that we have our basics sorted, let's tackle the first question. At what age should one get health insurance?
So the earlier the better, because if you continue your health insurance, your premiums are low up to a certain point. Of course, they get revised after you have certain medical conditions or when you reach a certain age. The companies have calculations to determine how much they might end up spending on illnesses that you might get in the future. So the premiums are revised, but a person getting it at, say, age 60 versus a person getting it at age 30, the premiums would be lower for a 30-year-old and it will remain low till they are 60. So you have paid your premium. The companies consider the fact that you've been paying your premiums, which has been supporting other people's treatment, and then that factors into your treatment as well. So it's always a good idea. 30, I would say, is the ideal age because before 30, we tend not to bother so much about our health. But after 30, we do see a lot of lifestyle disorders. In fact, in India, we do see heart attacks, hypertension, diabetes at a much earlier age. We start seeing it 25 onwards, but 30 is something that people suggest is when you should definitely get your insurance. That helps with a long-term treatment for, like I said, we are more prone to all the metabolic disorders. So that heart attack, etc., it will cover the costs.
And is there an age limit? Is there an age limit beyond which you can't get health insurance?
Not on paper. It's not. In fact, there were stories that said IRDAI, which is the insurance regulator in the country, they have now increased the age of enrollment like for people beyond 65. But from the industry experts that I spoke to, they said that anyway, insurance providers were supposed to do that, but most stopped their coverage at 60 or 65. And then beyond that as well, like getting a new insurance gets very difficult. Of course, they won't say that, no, we do not give you an insurance. But when you apply for coverage, applications do get rejected.
Okay, so what we've learned so far is that you need to get health insurance if you don't already have one. Definitely get it after 30. The sooner you get it, the better. But now let's talk about what factors come into play while picking a health insurance, because there are private companies that offer health insurance and there are public ones as well. Do we have a sense of which one is better? Should we go with a public company or a private one?
So there was a point, I think, when people did not want to buy private insurance, thinking, whether the claims would be covered or not. But these days with IRDAI regulation, all the companies are required to put out their claim settlement ratio. So basically, claim settlement ratio is the percentage of claims that a company receives in the total year and how many they settle, how many they pay out for. That's essentially the percentage that they have to mandatorily put out in public so that people can choose what works for them.
Yes, and people usually think that this is better in public companies than private ones.
Yes, people think that private insurance players would have a lower claim settlement ratio, but that's not the case. In fact, most people have like 99% claims, above 90% claim settlement ratio, which is a pretty good number.
And is that the case with most companies now?
Most of the leading companies, yes, that's the case, above 90%, and even for the government companies. Another factor that you should look into when you're buying the insurance is the network hospitals. So if you're buying insurance, make sure that the hospitals that are listed as partners in the insurance policy are there in your neighborhood, they are there in your city.
Okay, so what you're saying is that now it's a pretty competitive market. It doesn't matter all that much whether you go for a private health insurance or a public one. But one of the things to look out for in a good health insurance is that you should have a good hospital network. For this, you can look at their website, and ideally the hospital you prefer and trust should be on their list. And because we've mentioned IRDAI, we should also mention that that's the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, the statutory body that regulates insurance in the country. Now, the other thing that you need to consider is how much coverage you should get, because you can get an insurance that covers 10 lakh worth of expenses, and you can also get an insurance that covers 1 crore and more. So, Anonna, what factors should determine how much coverage one should get?
So, two things. One is the amount of premium that you are willing to pay. Because if you want more coverage, if you want 1 crore of coverage, for example, you would have to shell out a significant amount, which is not possible for most. And you don't need that either. So when you're young and healthy, probably a 10 lakh cover should do. Most likely you wouldn't exhaust that amount in a single year. And the thing is, you can keep increasing that amount as you age. So insurance companies do provide the option of changing your coverage. And every time you do add on any amount, there is, say, a waiting period.
Right. And waiting period, that's another health insurance term that we have introduced. Explain to our listeners what that is.
So waiting period is essentially a mandatory period for which any claim related to a condition that you already have at the time of getting the insurance would not be covered.
So, for example, if I get insurance after finding out I have cancer, the insurance is not immediately going to start paying for my cancer treatment.
No, they wouldn't. So there is a mandatory waiting period of between 2 to 4 years for, cancer is an extreme example. I would say heart condition, which a lot of people in India do have. So if you have had a heart attack, for example, and you get an insurance policy, they would not cover any heart-related problems for a period of, say, 2 years. So that's the waiting period.
And how much do these waiting periods typically range from?
Generally 2 to 4 years. And they do have a list of conditions for which the waiting period might be less or more. Generally, you would see the older a person is, they would have longer waiting periods. But of course, IRDAI recently told the insurance players that they should ideally bring down these waiting periods for even the elderly.
And we were talking about premiums earlier. Could you talk about how much, say, a 10 lakh cover cost a person?
So a healthy 30-year-old person who wants the insurance cover for, say, 10 lakhs would shell out anywhere between 10 to 15,000 in a year. If you want, say, a higher coverage, even up to 1 crore, like you mentioned, the premium for a young person would go up to, like, say, 18 to 20,000, not more than that. But then if similarly we look at premiums for the elderly, anybody above the age of 60 and they are likely to have, heart condition, BP, hypertension, they would have to shell out anywhere between like 30 to 50,000 for 10 lakh cover.
And a lot of people, especially young people, they end up being covered under their parents' health insurance, and often one that is provided by their workplace. So should one rely on the health insurance provided by a workplace?
No, because usually group insurance policies, such as the ones provided by the employers, have a very low coverage. So it wouldn't be ideally, say, more than 5 lakhs or something. And that doesn't cover a lot of things. In fact, it might not even be 5 lakhs. So you have to check what your group insurance offers, whether there are any terms and conditions to it, like how much you utilize in one go, or any restriction on the number of days or the type of room that you can select. So there would always be certain restrictions with insurance provided by the employers. And what happens if you quit? You do not have that insurance. That insurance does not cover you beyond your duration of employment. So once you change the company, your health insurance changes. But the thing is, if you have your own insurance, you keep that insurance going so that when you are 60 and you have some conditions, you're still paying a lower premium for getting those services.
Right, because once you switch to another company and you're much older, the premium is going to be much higher.
Yes. So if you're trying to get your first insurance after retiring, the premium is likely to be much higher than if you've continued since the time you're 30.
Anonna, earlier we were talking about how age determines how much premium we end up paying. But there are also other factors that affect this as well, right? For example, pre-existing conditions or even your weight for that matter. Could you talk about that a bit?
So, as we all know that being overweight or smoking, these are certain lifestyle, things that are associated with high risk of having a high blood pressure, high risk of getting diabetes, heart conditions. If you are binging on alcohol, then liver conditions, things like that. So these things are factored in, whether or not you are exercising regularly. These things get factored into the premium that you pay for your policy. So for example, if you are overweight, even at 30, you might end up paying something that is known as loading charges. So that would be, say, 10% markup on the premium that you have to pay. And even if you lose that weight later on, you have to continue paying that loading charge for the time that you have your policy.
And do companies check all this? For example, do they take a medical test while you're getting your insurance?
So most policies for the young insurance companies do not really check, but that's beside the point. Because if you lie about your history, something like smoking is very visible on any kind of scan that you do of your chest, and they would figure it out immediately. So if you've not declared that you are a smoker on your insurance policy, later on, if you have some lung disease or anything which is related to smoking, they will deny your claim, saying that you haven't accurately, given us your health information. So it's always better to declare whatever conditions you have, whatever surgeries you've undergone, even if your insurance agent says not to.
And so insurance agents actually tell you not to declare such things?
So in many cases, and it might have happened to you if you've gone through an insurance agent or one of the websites which sell different health policies, they would encourage you not to disclose certain, health conditions that you have. For example, I had a gallstone removal surgery, and that doesn't affect a lot of things, but they tell me don't disclose this because your premium will go up. For example, if you're overweight or you're a smoker, they will tell you don't disclose it. Usually they do not check for it. But the problem is they will sell you the policy and they won't be there when you need to claim it. And at the time of the claim is when you will find out that the companies will reject your claim if you have not accurately disclosed your health information.
So it might save you money on your premiums, but it will come back to bite you later.
Yeah, and it will defeat the whole purpose of having a health insurance.
Okay, so the other thing that we have learned is do not lie while getting health insurance. You do need to be truthful about your health and habits. But Anonna, now let's talk about some of the other things your health insurance should cover.
So the thing with health insurance is that none of them cover OPD care, which is where you end up spending most of the money.
OPD is outpatient department.
Yes, outpatient care, which is basically the clinic where you go for your first consultation, first point of contact with any health service is you walk into a clinic. But the insurance policies don't pay for that. Neither do they pay for any diagnostics that have been prescribed by the doctor in the OPD. So say you need a CT scan or, X-ray or whatever. And if you are not admitted in the hospital with certain condition, it doesn't get covered by your insurance policy.
So would it be fair to say that you have to spend a night at the hospital for the insurance to cover it?
Yes, that is usually what people try to do. If they have even, say, a daycare procedure, they would say that, please keep me in the hospital for a few extra hours because, yes, once you spend the night in the hospital, that's a proper admission. And once you're admitted, all the costs for diagnostics and everything that has happened will get covered. But you have to make sure that it's not just the diagnostics, that you are admitted to the hospital with some condition because admissions only to get tested. So for example, a cancer patient might need to get admitted to get their PET CT and MRI done, but those don't get covered. Unless the admission is for the treatment of something else, admission just for diagnostic doesn't get covered.
So nobody covers OPD?
Nobody, but you can get additional coverage. So you have to pay a top up and you can get OPD coverage. But from the people I spoke to who are basically, looking at providing the best insurance solution to people, they said you would end up spending, say, 10-15,000 for the OPD cover, but you might not spend 10-15,000 every year to go to an OPD. So it's a net loss for you. It's better to just pay out of pocket for the OPD.
Okay, and the other thing that people say you need to look for are a list of exclusions, things that the insurance would not cover, besides OPD, of course. So tell us what some of those things are.
So you would start getting covered for, say, a road accident from day one. You get the policy, you get into a road accident, it's covered. There's a list of certain conditions. So if you read the policy wording that comes with your agreement, you would see there is a list of conditions for which they have a waiting period. These are generally conditions which do not happen immediately, which would have taken, say, 3 or 4 years for you to get. So these conditions have a waiting period of, say, 12 months. Then there are existing conditions which you already know about. Say, you've already been diagnosed with hypertension, or you've already been diagnosed with a heart disease for which you need treatment. These will not get covered for, again, like I mentioned, the waiting period of 2 or 4 years as per the policy document.
And also, are there certain treatments of diseases that are not covered under health insurance?
So every policy has like different exceptions. For example, some might not cover robotic surgeries. In fact, we found that, mental health coverage is very difficult to get. Most policies would generally not cover Alzheimer's, dementia, things like that are not covered. Cancer care also, while it is covered, there are likely to be certain caps or certain terms and conditions apply when it comes to these diseases. So, most would cover, say, your chemotherapy and the common therapies, but you might not get the newest therapies that are there in the market. So there are a lot of exceptions or exclusions, which is again another thing that people should definitely go through. There is a list of exclusions which people should read carefully when they are getting the policy, especially say someone who has family history of Alzheimer's and may be at risk for Alzheimer's. They should take a look at the policy wording and see whether that gets covered.
And the other thing that is famously not covered under health insurance is dental. In fact, they say mental and dental is not covered under health insurance.
That is true. Yes. In fact, since the Mental Health Act came into force, companies have been forced to include mental health treatment. But we did a story comparing, these terms and conditions, looking at what kind of restrictions they place on mental health coverage. And we found that the way it operates, you essentially end up getting no coverage at all for mental health diseases. So if you look at conditions like, say, depression, anxiety, almost all of the treatment is outpatient. It is talk therapy, which is not covered by any policy.
Right, you're not spending a night at the hospital for that.
Yes, so it's not covered by any policy. But if you say, you're depressed and you attempt suicide, you get admitted to the hospital. But it's not covered. It's an exception. No policy covers self-harm. If you, say, are alcoholic, again, so for long-term care, for rehab care, for addictions, it's again something that companies do not pay for. So that is again excluded. So there is hardly any, unless you have some severe mental health issue for which you need hospitalization, most of it does not get covered by the health insurances.
And do health insurances cover expenses related to pregnancy, or is that excluded as well?
That's again one of the terms and conditions that people should check for, especially if they are planning to have a family in the next few years. Because when we started reading the policy wordings, we realized that pregnancy is not covered in quite a few. And the ones that do cover, they actually make a special mention of pregnancy being covered in their policy. So please do look out for pregnancy coverage. Then another thing that is very important is the coverage for newborns. So even if your pregnancy is covered, if your newborn has certain conditions, it might not be covered. So please do look out for those things. Pregnancy cover is, if you're starting a family, it's important.
And Anonna, we were talking about OPD earlier, but is that different from daycare procedures, and do policies cover that?
So daycare procedures are not doctor consultation alone. It's a procedure. So for example, endoscopy, colonoscopy. So you have daycare chemotherapies, you have dialysis. Dialysis is a very common daycare procedure now. So all of this, again, a lot of insurance companies will cover daycare procedures which are medically necessary. So something like a dialysis or a chemotherapy is likely to be, covered. Now that's happening more because, like I mentioned, people would want to stay on for the day to get insurance cover. So now a lot of companies do cover these daycare procedures. But again, they come with terms and conditions. Like, for example, as I said, if it's a rehab facility or like a long-term mental health care thing, that is not covered. But a medically necessary thing, yes, it will be covered.
And because we are talking about things that are medically necessary, I'm guessing something like a Botox is not covered, even though it might be a daycare procedure.
Yes. Again, that's a very common exclusion in almost all policies that I've read. Anything to do with cosmetic surgery where it's not medically necessitated. So, for example, if you have a nose, which is, very common thing, deviated septum, that can be considered to be medically necessary and that would be covered. So, in that case, a rhinoplasty would be covered. But if you want to make your nose look sharper, that won't be covered. So anything cosmetic, it's not covered.
And Anonna, when talking about hospitalization, the other thing that is often mentioned is the cap on room rent. And every policy is different regarding that. So talk about how that works and what happens when you end up choosing a hospital room that your policy does not cover.
So sometimes it might be that the category of room that is covered under your policy, it could be a dual sharing or a general ward, is not available. You go to a private single bed room. What happens? You end up paying more. You have to pay the difference. And again, this is different for every policy. You either end up paying the difference or there is a certain copay. So you have to pay a percentage. And yes, I have introduced another term.
Yes, and copay is something that people warn you about. This is something that your policy should not have.
So copay is basically where a person has to pay, say, 10 or 20%. It's a pre-decided percentage of the cost that you've incurred, and the health insurance policy would reimburse the rest. So in most cases for young people, copay is not such a problem unless, like you said, if it's a room rent that's not covered. So in such cases, you end up paying higher, but only for the room rent and not for the entire bill. But when we looked at policies for the old, there were copays ranging from 30% to 50%. So essentially what that means is you end up paying half of your medical bill and the rest of it is covered by the policy. So yes, it is skewed for the elderly. In fact, they also have something called deductibles, which is essentially a certain amount that is fixed by the insurance payer. And when you have paid that much annually, only after that the insurance kicks in. So say if it's 1 lakh, only when you spend 2 lakhs on your health that year, 1 lakh would be paid by you and then the coverage of the insurance starts. So that's again something we do not usually see with policies for the young, but that's there for the elderly.
And when talking about room rent, it can affect other expenses as well, right?
So the room rent essentially also decides how much your doctor consultation would cost, how much your tests would cost.
Yeah, so for example, if I'm choosing a private room, then the consultation fee I pay the doctor, the money I pay for tests, all of it goes up.
Yeah, the nursing fee that you pay, all of that goes up. So there are different ways that insurance companies adjust for that. So either you pay the difference or like I said, there is certain amount of copay, or they might have a fixed percentage or a fixed amount that you have to pay for that for a higher room. So every policy has a different way of adjusting for it.
Okay, and the other thing that one needs to be mindful about is pre and post hospitalization cost. So could you talk about how those things are usually covered under policies?
So most policies cover like about a couple of months before and after the surgery or like whatever you have been hospitalized with. But in that case, it has to be, again, a medically necessary thing. So for example, you have a complication from your surgery, you get an infection. Management of that infection is covered. But for example, you have a fall and you need to recuperate in a nursing home. You don't need to stay there for a surgery or for any procedure, but you need to stay on because you say, for example, live alone and there's nobody to take care of you. So you need to be in a nursing home so that you have enough support to go about your day-to-day life. That will not be covered. Physiotherapy will be covered. But again, something that is not strictly for the treatment will not be covered. Then, like we were talking about consumables, even when you're admitted to the hospital, consumables are not covered. So all your gloves, masks, gowns that they give, the disposable gowns, the PPE kits the doctors are wearing, the sheet covers that you have which need to be thrown out for every patient, all of that is not covered by your insurance.
So consumables are a common exclusion?
Yes, most policies exclude consumables. And you can get a top-up again for that. Or so for the young, usually it comes attached with the premium. So it will be like some couple of $100, which you don't really bother about. But it's important because that can add up to a lot of your bill when you are hospitalized with something serious.
And we understand that over-the-counter drugs and supplements, for example, are also something that are not included. But the other term that we are now introducing is a no-claim bonus. Tell us what a no-claim bonus is.
So, like I mentioned, health insurances pay for the sick people using the premiums of the healthy people. So, healthy people get a bonus for not having made any claims through the year. So, if you have a policy, you got a policy this year and you have not made any claims, you've been healthy. For the next year, when you're renewing your insurance, you get a deduction in the premium based on the fact. So it could be a percentage of your premium or a certain fixed value that is deducted from the premium every year that you do not claim money from the insurance.
And what are sublimits? Because that is also something you hear a lot about.
So sublimits are essentially fixed limits for certain conditions or, certain procedures. So like I mentioned earlier about the robotic surgery, some do not cover it at all, but some say that, okay, it can be only $1 lakh. So you would have a fixed cap on coverage for certain procedures or certain ailments. For example, I was speaking to a mental health activist who himself has bipolar disorder. But again, his policy, even though he has a special policy which covers mental health, which covers the OPD costs, his policy still has a sublimit for bipolar disorder, which is only 25% of your policy limit can be utilized for mental health. So you can have these sublimits written into your policy for certain specific conditions.
And the other thing is that when you're young, you're often included under your parents' insurance, under a family floater. Could you talk about what are some of the benefits and disadvantages of getting a family floater plan? Benefits, I'm guessing, is that your premium is much lower.
Yeah, your premium is combined. In family floater plans, usually the premium is whatever would be the premium for the person who's the sickest or the person who's the oldest. So that covers the rest of the family. So yes, premium wise, if you get separate policies for everyone, that would add up. Instead, you get one policy and everybody is covered. But again, with family floater is that you still have that, say, 10 or 15 lakh policy coverage limit. So if one person has a chronic disease and utilizes X amount every year, we know that, and there is an emergency with another family member, it could add up to be more than your policy amount, and then it's a problem.
So for example, if you have a coverage of 5 lakh for your family and someone falls sick and ends up using all of that 5 lakh in a year, then you have nothing left for others in the plan.
Yes. So if we take the example of 5 lakh and somebody has a chronic kidney disease or a chronic heart disease and utilizes, say, 3.5 lakh every year, then it's only the 1.5 lakh that's left for the other family members. And if you get into, say, an accident or something happens, something major healthcare happens, then you only have that much amount remaining for your coverage. So that's one of the negatives of the family floater plan.
Right. And some policies do have a top-up option called restore benefit, where if you end up utilizing your amount, it gets restored immediately.
So essentially, instead of 5 lakhs, you get a 10 lakh coverage. Because if you end up using the 5 lakh, another 5 lakh gets restored. Yes, they do have those policies.
And Anonna, earlier we spoke about a claim settlement ratio. Could you talk about some of the common reasons that claims get rejected?
So the most common reason is actually, not making proper declarations when you're getting the policy. And in fact, a lot of people end up finding out much later. So they might be paying for the policy for 5 years and then later on realize that, oh, I'm not covered for these conditions at all. In fact, one of the people that I spoke to while doing my insurance stories said a lot of people coming back to them after buying policies from a website, comparing things, and insurance agents telling them it's okay, you don't need to declare this. And then when they actually need to use the policy for a claim, their claim gets rejected. So that is, I think, one of the most common reasons why it does.
And Anonna, are there any kind of people that insurance companies usually try to avoid?
Definitely. So, while a policy would not outright say in their, documents or policy wordings anywhere that, okay, we do not cover such and such person, but these are the people who would find their application being rejected by health insurance companies without really giving any reason. And those would be elderly people who already have multiple, conditions. They've been diagnosed, they've had treatment for it. They are likely not get coverage with most companies. Then there are people who have had, say, for example, stenting. Very common procedure. You see a lot of people who've had heart attack get it. But if you have, even with one stent, it's difficult. But with 2 stents, you're likely to be flat out rejected. Then mental health is another big thing. So I called up an insurance agent and I just said, I have anxiety and depression. It's diagnosed and I'm on pills for it. And they said, so most likely it will be a lifelong exclusion. You will never be covered for these conditions ever. And most likely for most mental health conditions. So these are the things that you would hear them talk about, but they wouldn't say that in writing or in the policy wording.
But legally, they're not supposed to deny you insurance because of that, right?
No, because mental health, for example, should be treated at par with any physical health condition. That's what the Mental Health Act says. So they cannot deny you coverage for a condition because you have it. They might have a waiting period like it's common for any other condition. So they can say that, okay, we will not cover it for 2 years. But after that, they are supposed to. So you can actually challenge that in court because the law is in your favor. But yes, these applications do get denied.
And Anonna, finally, as someone who has gone through a lot of health insurance policies, what advice would you give to someone who's just getting into it? What are the kind of things they should look out for while reading a health insurance policy?
So, of course, the 2 things that we mentioned initially, those are the most important things. First, check the network of hospitals where you can utilize the policy. Second, the claim settlement ratio. Then people should demand to see the policy wordings because a lot of policies, what they do is they say that the policy wording is on the website. You can go look at it. It's mostly like how we sign up for Google. We do not read the terms and conditions. But it is essential because you might find out later on that, oh, this is not covered. So there are certain things that you should check. One is, of course, any sublimits that a policy has, any co-pays or deductibles that a policy has. These are usually listed out. If it's for certain condition, please check that. Then there is a list of exclusions that most policies provide. So go through that list, check what kind of treatments will get covered, what will not get covered. That is one thing that people must do. And other than that, of course, you can take a look at things like whether they provide daycare, home care, whether they provide ambulance coverage, whether they provide health checkups. But those are additional things. The main thing is to check for any sublimits, caps, and any exclusions. These are the main segments that people should definitely go through when they're buying the policy.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.